So I'd like to start with something a little different that I discovered a while back or rediscovered. Uh, I got this out of a library years ago, long before IMSLP existed, from the Duke University Library in North Carolina, and I find it very intriguing. It is called, and I think Luke is going to put up the title page so you can look at this, Musical Characteristics by Clementi, subtitled A Collection of Preludes and Cadences um, for the harpsichord or the piano. There it is. Composed in the style of, you can see the various composers there, as well as in the style of himself, the author, namely Clementi. This was first published in 1787. Clementi was 35 years old. This is approximately 10 years before the Sonatinas, Opus 36, came out. And I found it very interesting that Clementi republished this many times through his life. I don't even think that's the original publication. I'm not sure that's the original one. But in any case, he must have thought it was fairly important if he published it that many times. Sort of like Opus 36 was published at least 6 times by Clementi himself, let alone others. So it's a collection of 12 preludes, 6 cadenzas, and I'm going to read to you a little bit from an article by Eva Badura-Skoda, a musicologist. She's the wife of Paul Badura-Skoda. You probably know both of those names. And she writes in an article in Studies in the 18th Century Music, an article, I think this is 1970, we should consider this set of pieces as one of the few examples of written down improvisation, such as were customary at that time. You find in these preludes and cadenzas a lot of runs, arpeggios, figurations, modulations, sequences, but it's also described by, I think it was, what's his name, Alan Tyson, as rather desultory. Another word for that would be meandering. So yeah, it's kind of a free-spirited meandering. Anyway, I'm going to play the last one in this book. It's by Clementi himself, and then I'll talk a little further. So this is a cadenza, number 18 in the book. I'm assuming you could probably interject. Well, I don't know about that. But anyway, never mind. Feels like it needs an anticipation here. Hey, Luke, you know what would be a fun compositional project? It just occurs to me. Somebody should write the piece that's missing before this, and then the little bit that maybe should come after it. You know, we watched, me and my granddaughters the other day, we watched a Daffy Duck cartoon where Daffy Duck is trying to sell something to this criminal. I mean, it's a long, convoluted, silly plot, but finally the whole house blows up, and Daffy Duck is holding a doorknob, and he says, "I know, you need a house to go to with this doorknob." I was just thinking of that with this piece. It feels like the house is missing, but I got the doorknob here. Anyway, what I also found interesting is that all of these preludes and cadenzas are referred to as, like I say, not particularly inspired, frankly, rather insipid. And I take a little solace in that, we all think that we have to be really great at this to do it. And I think this shows that, nah, maybe not. Anyway. So I'm going to move on. I just wanted to sort of soften you up to the idea that in case you're questioning the whole premise that Clementi would have taken liberties with his own music or others or whatever, I think this proves that he was perfectly in sync with the zeitgeist of the times, the spirit of the times. So moving along, do we have any consensus on a favorite, Luke, by any chance?
I've only heard from one, and we have a vote for number 4, movement 1.
Okay. Well, I'll definitely touch upon that one. That's an interesting one. In that case, I think what I'll do, I'll hone in on number 1 because we teach that one a lot, and maybe the first movement of number 6 particularly because that shows up quite a bit for the more advanced students as a popular favorite. Um, okay, so in fairness to the person asking for number 4, maybe I'll start with that. Um, I want to show everybody something here. I don't know how visible this will be, but I do have this Willard Palmer. It shows up backwards. Anyway, can you fix that, Luke? Okay, never mind. Uh, the edition that came out quite a while back, Alfred edition, edited by Willard Palmer. George Litterst and I are still trying to figure out exactly what his source for this was. It's a little baffling, but that's a complicated topic. So what I did years ago is I superimposed, I don't know if this is really, I guess you can't see it very well, all the changes that Clementi made in his original version and his revised version. Maybe I should back up and explain that real briefly. Most of you may know this. 1797 was when the original version of these Opus 36 Six Sonatinas came out by Longman and Broderick. Clementi later published 6 editions of these pieces. The first 4 are essentially the original version that we all know and play from. Most of us have some form of that edition, the original version. The 5th edition came out sometime around 1815, possibly as early as 1813, but anyway, somewhere around there, circa 1813 and 15. And he boldly proclaimed on the cover, with considerable improvements by the author. And that version is very, very hard to get these days, unless you have here we go. Plug for my edition here, the Abundant Silence edition. This edition, which came out in 2017, collates all the sources actually, insofar as they can be. But of course, it's more in line, most in line with the 5th edition, with considerable improvements. And those changes that he made are quite extensive actually. In roughly 1820, 1821. He published a 6th edition, which is really a reprint of the 5th edition with some changes, not too many. The interesting thing about the whole history of this is the following. When you buy an edition of the first version, it tends to be based on the very, very first publication, but not the 4th edition, which is the last time that Clementi issued his original version. That 4th edition is very hard to come by. I have it. And it has some interesting changes which will relate to number 4. I'm going to get back to that in a minute. The revised version, that 5th and 6th edition, essentially, insofar as you can find any of those other than my edition, they're usually based on the 6th edition. The problem with that is in the 6th edition, Clementi made all kinds of typographical errors that you tend not to find in the 5th edition, which nobody uses hardly. So, in other words, all the publishers have managed to get just about as much wrong as possible. I hate to put it that way, bluntly, but and I would dare say that just about every modern edition has numerous errors. Many of those were essentially Clementi's own errors or his copyist. So that's somewhat forgivable, but quite a few of those errors are editorial. And I should point out the most egregious error, which I do have a lengthy footnote about in my edition. And Evelyn asked me to mention that there are extensive, I mean, probably more extensive footnotes in the Abundant Silence edition than any other edition out there. So if you have your music, number 6, the second movement, there are only 2 movements, so it's the final piece in the volume. The tempo that you will see in most editions is allegretto, allegro spiritoso. Unfortunately, both of those markings are really wrong. Allegro doesn't show up anywhere in any primary source. I have great admiration for Willard Palmer. However, for some reason, he put allegro in that movement, but that simply is wrong. I think he meant to put allegretto. It's a typo. And then subsequent editions, I think, are simply using secondary sources like this and perpetuating that mistake. And then the second word, allegro spiritoso, that word was used by Clementi in the original version, but then he changed it to pastoral, which is very, very different. Like I say, extensive footnote on that. Pastoral is practically a lullaby. So the tempo, so probably closer to that. If you think allegro spiritoso, you're going to sound like some kid on drugs or coffee or whatever. I mean, it's just off the charts way too fast. Or you're going to sound like Tony, actually, now that I think about it. Yeah. He's the only one whose disposition makes me look like a church minister. But anyway, moving right along. Back to our program. So let me discuss maybe number 1. I want to show you something cool here. In my own working copy, my performance copy, you probably can't really see this very well. I juxtaposed both versions, Clementi's original and his revised. So let's talk about creativity. The most obviously fun creative thing to do with the 2 versions of Clementi, the 2 authentic versions, would be to mix and match. We've got repeat signs. Chances are, in the classic era, they would have been more likely to take those repeats than not. Clementi does qualify that sometimes the second repeat, if the piece is very long in sonata form, maybe don't take the second repeat. However, with sonatinas, can any section be considered truly long? So I mean, I'm fine with doing both repeats. So the most obvious thing for me would be to do the original version the first time, and then on the repeat, do the revised version. So let's see. I think I want to jump to the development, however, because that's where you find the more interesting changes. One of the big things that he did between the first version and his revised version is he added authentic pedal marks, and some of them are quite stunning. So this interesting little pedal point. I'm at the development. I think it's measure 31. If you have the music. And on the revised version, he adds a long pedal mark through all of that. If I play this badly on a modern piano, I don't think you're going to like it, so I'm going to play it badly deliberately. It's a little bit tough to take. So my suggestion would be 2 things. Voice it a whole lot better than I just did right now. And what I mean by that is a little less right hand, a little bit more left hand. I know that sounds a little counterintuitive, but I think the pedal point is the important thing here. And then the other thing would be maybe a half pedal, and perhaps even soft pedal. And it's still a little bit strange to our ears, perhaps, but I kind of like it. So that's one of the changes he made. And when I play, like I say, rather creatively, one could do the original version without the pedal and then add the pedal on the second time. But one of the really interesting changes he made, but this only shows up in the fourth edition, the very last edition that still represents the original version. He added a turn to the recapitulation, and I'll play it. I'll play it first without pedal, which is very cool. Um, and so my edition collates all the sources to the extent that that's possible. What I mean is sometimes the original version and the revised version are simply not compatible. So then I favor the revised version. In the case of this, there's no reason not to do that turn, so I have it in parentheses, and you know you can do it. He also adds pedal to that place, so boy, that's a little tricky on a modern piano, but on his piano it wouldn't sound bad at all. So I'm going to try to play it well, not too loud on the left hand, half pedal, and maybe soft pedal. And usually most pianos, if you put the soft pedal, the unicorn to maybe 3/4 of the way rather than all the way down, it's a little better too. So it's a little tricky. No, let me try it again. I'm trying to find the twilight zone here. There we go. I like that.
Arthur, can you remind folks which sonatina and movement we're on right now?
Sorry, this is number 4, first movement, F major. Yeah. Sorry about that. Okay. I could play through it, but I think I want to move on to number 1. So I asked Sandra Rosenblum, the famous musicologist, who, by the way, is still alive, and she was a huge, huge help. I quote her quite a bit. She was a big help in me putting out this Clementi edition. I once asked her, do you agree with Clementi that all the changes he made in his revised version are, and I quote, considerable improvements? And she wrote back to me something to the effect that, well, he was a very astute businessman, kind of implying that, it's a bit subjective. A lot of the changes, this is important to mention, are the result of the gradually expanding keyboard, or piano rather, of Clementi's day. As you know, they had less keys, and then gradually it got larger and larger. So as that was happening, he couldn't wait to use the extra notes, especially on the high end. So a lot of the changes are simply him taking certain places in the melody and just bringing it up an octave. And I'm not sure that that's always necessarily improved. It's interesting. Maybe it's as good. Sometimes I like it better. For example, number 6, the first movement on the recapitulation, he actually puts it up here. And I investigated this, and I have a footnote about it. I think that's a music box effect, especially with that long pedal. It's very interesting. I find that really, really charming. So there are places where I think that might be considered better. However, I wouldn't throw out your original edition of this piece, because if you have one, because in some cases, so getting back to number 1, I'll play the original version, which you all know. So this part, sorry, I still got it wrong. There we go. He changed that in the revised version to this. I'll give you a little context. Instead of, I have to be honest, I think I like the original version better. I mean, I like the second one just fine. So when I do the repeat, I do both versions, but that's one example of something that I think I like better, the original. Another touch that I thought was really interesting, in number 5 and 6, he changes harmonies to make them a lot more interesting. Incidentally, if you haven't compared number 5, the original version with the revised, wow, it's almost a whole new piece. The first movement is radically revised. It's quite extensive. But I'm thinking of how's it going? That only shows up in the revised version. That B minor in the original. He just stays on D major, but I find it so much more interesting. I think that's so much more poignant. So he definitely messes around with harmonies. I'd like to do something kind of fun. I'd like to get into the nitty-gritty of how do we do creative things beyond, say, just mixing and matching. So one of the things that you can do that's very much in sync with the performance practice of the time are lead-in cadenzas. So anybody of you know what a lead-in cadenza is? It's actually from Baroque practice. It usually occurs just before the return of the main, like just before a recapitulation in a sonata form. And you have sort of a dominant seventh build-up, and there's a fermata, and then you've got your recap. Well, that fermata is begging for some embellishing oftentimes, but we don't do that. I mean, singers usually remember these practices, but pianists often do not. So I'm going to give you an example of that real quick. In number 6, getting back to that, here we go. So, I mean, in my opinion, you could do this both times. On the original version, I'm at measure. Oh gosh, I can't even read this. I think it's measure. Oh, sorry, I can't read the number. Anyway, it's just before the recapitulation. I just made that up on the spot. It's not particularly great. And then on the revised version, if you do the repeat, let me find that. That would have been standard practice back then to just throw in something there. That particular little leading cadenza that I played is actually spelled out in my footnotes as an example. Certainly don't have to do it. But I wanted to get into the nitty-gritty of just how we do these kinds of fun things. So getting back to number 1 for 1 second, in the second section of number 1, I guess, yeah, the development, albeit a very short development because it's a very short piece. Let's see, he has originally, you all recognize that part, right? And then it goes, and in the revised version, he goes up an octave and he changes one additional thing. So can you hear that? It says fun with neighbor note there, okay? And it occurred to me you could maybe make that change, but without going up the octave if you don't like the octave leap. I just got to know a fellow by the name of Paul Wirth, W-I-R-T-H, a phenomenal pianist and scholar. And he was giving a Clementi presentation, and he quoted me, so I'm going to quote him in his presentation I've watched. And he had a suggestion for small-handed students, because not all of them can reach this octave. It's otherwise very easy, this movement, but there are students who can't reach that, and he suggested to do this instead. Can you hear what I'm doing? I'm doing a sixth, G down to B, and then G down to C, which matches the harmonies. I thought that was a stroke of genius. So that's a little creative thing to do to accommodate the limitations of a student. Which, by the way, all the great composers, I think, do that sort of thing. Chopin, I could give an entire lecture on the accommodations that he makes with students because of technical challenges, for example. I mean, he's got an alternative, simpler version of this, his Etude in E, where he crosses out all the difficult measures with the chromatics and the cadenza, changes harmonies, makes the whole thing work. That's never been published. If you want to know what that's all about, you have to read some scholarly article in order to, it's ridiculous. Somebody's got to publish that. Hint, 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 Luke. Anyway, back to Clementi. So it occurred to me, this little fun thing. So this idea of using a neighbor note instead of staying on G, it hit me later. Well, when I'm playing the second movement, maybe I could apply Clementi's idea creatively like this. Okay, so he writes, which is perfectly lovely, but how about this? And I'm going to go up an octave too, because the revised version goes up an octave. It's like, why not? You know, that's the same idea he uses in the first movement. It's not his, technically, but I think it's quite lovely. I want to talk a little bit about the third movement. The thought crossed my mind that, well, you might be wondering, back to here, this part right here, why didn't he write this? Which logically would have been like the original version. Well, it turns out that even though his piano was expanding, he didn't quite have this note yet. So he had to use some creativity to accommodate that. Even though his piano is larger, it's not quite large enough to accommodate that. So he had to make up something different, which, quite frankly, I'm not sure I like quite as much as the original. So when I play it, oftentimes I'll do this. I'll just go up an octave, I'll do a pedal, play it softly and everything. Half pedal, by the way. And since I do have those notes, why not play them? And then I was thinking about the third movement of number one. What if I played a little game of what if? What if Clementi had a full-sized keyboard like we have here? Okay, all 88 keys. Maybe, just maybe, he might have done something like this. So I'm gonna play this a mix and match version of the two versions, the original and the revised, and I'm going to go up 2 octaves at a certain point. Oops, sorry. I screwed up a little bit there, but did you notice I just interjected a little lead-in cadenza there? And so forth. And then it occurred to me here, why not? That would sound lovely too. Or instead of this, how about, can you hear the difference? It's only slightly different from I did. Or maybe, let's see. No, that doesn't work. Hold on. There we go. And some of the endings where you have just a tonic, I don't think here, but in some of the other sonatinas, he adds a long pedal. So I wouldn't rule that out here. I know this is a little bit freewheeling, but I want to touch upon, before we run out of time, um, when you're doing these kinds of creative things, what specifically are we doing? We're doing passing tones sometimes. That's a very obvious thing. You have maybe a third, and you just interject the passing tone. Very common. Neighbor notes, already discussed that. Maybe arpeggios, throw in some arpeggiated figures. A cheap shot, by the way, has got chromatic scale. That always works. No matter what harmony you're on, a little bit of chromatics might work. Obviously, scales, turn figures, ornaments. Getting back briefly to the lead in cadenza thing. So how did I come up with something like this? That isn't quite as random as it might appear. This, that's essentially a scale. I mean, if you're playing a scale against the dominant seventh, A7, it's pretty obvious that it's A to A with a C sharp. Excuse me, C sharp and F sharp. So that would be Mixolydian mode, I guess. With one passing tone. Now here, well, what's one of the main motives of this number 6 is the turn figure. He starts right off with it, so I interjected that into the cadenza. And then here, that falling third is very, very common motivically in the, so this sort of integrating, looking at the motives of a particular movement and working those into your cadenza would be a good idea as well. So I hope you took notes on it. Passing tones, neighbor notes, arpeggios, scales that fit the harmony. Whatever you do has to sound good over that suspended dominant seventh. It shouldn't be too long. The idea is to extend the fun, but not so long that people don't care if you resolve. In other words, don't do like my humor, okay? Just keep it nice and short. Let's see. How much time do I have? When did we start?
I'm wondering if folks have questions, if anybody would like to come on to ask a question. Matt asked a while back, did you say that the original was published in 1797?
Yeah, the very, very first edition, 1797. And now when Clementi published it, I think that's closer to 1801 for his first edition. And then, like I say, the very last edition, the sixth edition, came out roughly 1820, 1821. And by the way, that fourth edition, which, like I say, is quite intriguing because it has about 4 or 5, maybe a half dozen little tweaks, little changes that you don't find anywhere else. I don't think it's out there anymore. I got it from the Harvard University Library. Sandra Rosenblum was instrumental in making sure that their librarian didn't discard it. And since then, I think they did discard it. So I have it, but I'm not sure it's gettable anymore. So if you want to see those elements, you have to either purchase my edition or the edition that just came out with George Litterst and me. We collaborated to put out another edition. The difference with that edition is it's interactive. If you're interested, just email me and I can shoot you the link to that one as well. If you're into technology, it's a little different, less footnotes, a little bit of a cleaner score, but it's fundamentally in sync with what I've done in the Abundant Silence edition. Oh, Luke, did you mention that the 10% discount?
Yeah, so if you don't already have Arthur's edition, you can check out our brand new store abundantsilence.store, there's a space there that shouldn't be there.
Uh-oh.
I'm used to typing both words. Oh, okay, third time's a charm. uh, Hopefully third time's a charm. I type pretty much all day for work, so this is what happens. And use this discount code. You can get a special little 10% discount on Arthur's Edition. Matt had a comment earlier that I really love. Jazzers call that a bebop scale, talking about your
Excellent.
A Mixolydian scale with that passing tone at the top. And I think I want to yield my host authoritarian powers here and ask you to play at least one movement of one of the sonatinas all the way through.
Sure.
Maybe one of your favorite creative elements.
Let me just think on that for just a second. Yeah. You know, some of the movements of some of these sonatinas don't have repeats. So that begs the question, how do I get kind of fun and creative with mixing elements of both versions, Clementi's versions, or doing my own things here and there, hopefully in good taste, again, as opposed to my humor. So I want to see if I can find one of those movements that doesn't explicit. Oh, I know. Here's a good one. Well, it does have repeats, but okay, I'm going to play. This is a very teachable one. It's the second movement, the middle movement of number 3, C major. All right, and I want to preface that Clementi could not make up his mind on the tempo of this movement. It's fascinating. I mean, of all the movements of all 6 of these, this is the most wild about tempo. I think he has everything from andante to poco adagio to adagio in various editions. And that's really amazing because, for one thing, if you read up on tempos with Clementi, he's a little quirky. He lists adagio as the very slowest tempo, even slower than largo, which is ridiculous. I mean, that's just a Clementi thing, but that's his opinion. So it's really quite stunning that he thinks that this movement can work anything from andante to, all the way to adagio. And so when I tried this at different movements, I found it really fascinating because it really does work at vastly. That's very unusual to me. Most pieces, I think, if you think long enough and practice long, you kind of settle into a tempo that really works. But this one, I mean, I think you could indeed go as slow as maybe, I don't know. And maybe as fast as, let's see. And if you think that's too fast, consider that it's really cut time. So if you're thinking and conducting in cut time, it's really not that fast, as one might think. So I just thought that was worth mentioning. I kind of split the difference usually as far as tempo goes, but I'm going to play this through with repeats. Oh, I should mention real quick, though, a performance practice thing that's not very well known. I do mention it in my footnotes. In the left hand, you see by the bar slurs. Now, I think it would be absolutely silly and ridiculous to do this. Hiccup. Hiccup. I mean, there's no way that a composer means something like that. If you think of it as a string bowing, it makes perfect sense too. A string player, a cellist probably, would not lift the bow. It's just a change of bow, so maybe... Possibly, but Sandra Rosenblum points out in her performance practice book, it's a very important book, that's a secret code that by the bar slurring, if it's over harmonies, to do a finger pedal, overhold all the notes. like this. And you might ask, well, why not just pedal it? Okay, I'm going to just pedal it. And you tell me why I shouldn't do this. Well, it's pretty obvious the right hand would sound dreadful. So this is a way to get, in essence, a split damper effect. I don't know if you know what that is, but they used to have sometimes split dampers where I grew up with a piano like that. I could pedal the bottom half of the keyboard independently of the right side. So you can create that effect by doing finger pedal. Anyway, now I'm going to play it. So what I did was mix and match the two versions and threw in a whole lot of my own stuff as well. I could have just done this, but I thought, you know, Clementi himself introduces interesting passing tones, harmonies, whatever, and this is so much more fun to me. Let's see. You know, I'm wondering if he had the keyboard, would he have done this? Gone all the way up to there? Maybe not. I don't know. But I love exploring these kind of things. When I just sort of practice for creativity, I try a lot of things. I always have a wastebasket nearby because probably 90% of what I try spontaneously, I go, ugh, I don't want to hear that again, toss. And maybe 40% are like, yeah, I'll think about it. I'll get back to that. And then every so I get a keeper is, oh yeah, I'm going to scribble that one in. So you might ask, do I do this truly spontaneously in performance? Sometimes. I'm that brave. Probably as often or more often, I work them out in advance. But they sound spontaneous. The audience won't know the difference. So you don't necessarily have to be that risky, but
Yeah, I think we have time for maybe a couple questions here. I'm going to
great.
remove your spotlight, Arthur, and go to gallery mode myself so we can all see each other's screens a little bit. Zachary has a question.
Hey, glad
How
you.
much rubato and what kind is allowed for Clementi?
Oh, what an excellent question. You know, in the case of Opus 36, you know, the entire Opus 36, I think, is somewhat transitional. If you look at very early Clementi, he's very much classic era in my mind. But then you look at late Clementi, and he's full-fledged romantic. I mean, we think of Beethoven that way, but I think Clementi very much fits that mold as well. With Opus 36, I would put it mostly classic era, but you look at the revised version and where he's going, you're starting to get some more romantic elements. So the question of rubato, well, I'm thinking of one specific movement. I've just got to find it here. Give me a second. I think it's the second movement of the. Yes, here we go. So on Speaking of number four again, number four, second movement, the middle movement. He marks it andante con espressione, and I do have a footnote about this. Definitely implies a certain degree of rubato for this one. I wouldn't say it's a full-fledged, holy cow, Chopin rubato or anything, but subtly. That hairpin decrescendo there, it looks like, is probably an agogic accent. If you buy into Seymour Bernstein's theory about these hairpins, there's a little bit of an agogic accent. You take a little bit of extra time. Now, I'm going to exaggerate. That might be a little, maybe I like it, I don't know, a hair too much, but there's a little bit of rubato there. Maybe more so here. And then a lot of the rubato I do, I don't know if any of you do this, but I'll take really good recordings and I'll put it on Audacity. And I'll take maybe 40% of the speed off of it, and then I'll listen to it and I'll try to play along. And then these very, very subtle rubati come through, like somebody playing something expressively just slightly late, just slightly early. You don't even notice it consciously. You just, oh, it's great playing, but you're not really conscious. But then you slow it down, and you go, wow, there's a lot more flexibility there than I know. I mean, even number 6, if you're listening very carefully. That's pretty much in time, but quite free at the same time. Can you hear that, everybody? I hope that answers your question, Zach. And Beethoven, we know, did that sort of thing. Very much so. You can quibble about all of Schnabel's little metronome markings, that's a descendant, so to speak, of Beethoven. But the idea that he would subtly change tempo is absolutely sound from all the eyewitness accounts. Americans, we're terribly, terribly metronomic in our playing often, and it's not always really in sync with what they would have done. Any other questions?
I'm wondering, Arthur, if you could ask the professor to take another chair and play us, just play us one of the sonatinas. You keep getting into it and then telling us things that come to you, and it's delightful. But I think we'd really like to hear one of them.
Okay. Any candidates for that? I don't know. Number 3 I didn't discuss at all. How about if I play... wait a minute, that's not what I'm looking for. Here we go. Okay. You want me to just play through the entire thing with repeat? Do we have time? I think we have maybe time. Okay. So I'm going to do the first version and then the revised version on the repeats with, of course, some of my own ideas. Take 2. I haven't practiced recently very much on these. It's a little shaky, but
Thank you, Arthur. Winann had a question.
you bet.
What kind of pedal did Clementi have to work with?
What kind of pedal? Well, originally he didn't have one, but in the revised version, I believe then he would have. Chances are it would have been a knee lever thing. A little trivia question. Uh, what's the first examples of notated indications for pedal by major composers? When do we find those? Would it surprise you that with Beethoven, it was so new that I think this might be in a sketch or an autograph somewhere. He writes "mit dem knees," with your knees, because it was a lever thing like this, and you had to, shift it like that. It wasn't down here at first. So I would think that that would be what Clementi had. Um, yeah. So yeah, I mean, you notice this. I mean, that's pretty wild. Uh, but I kind of like it even on a modern piano, even though it would offend some people. I mean, obviously, don't play the left hand too loud because you're going to hear it. I mean, that's terrible. But I mean, if you maybe not quite full pedal, not too loud in the left hand, it's kind of nice. Although I
I'm
have,
I'm always a little nervous about adding a lot of pedal into this era. So it's nice to hear you do it.
well, I mean, it's not me. It is Clementi introducing that, really, himself. But I was going to say, one of my students did that authentic pedal and got raked over the coals by the judge over it, even though they had my edition in front of them with a footnote and an explanation. So I don't know. It is a little risque, maybe, when you do things like that. I mean, I tell teachers and students, pencil in, annotate something so that the judges know that you're not just doing something crazy. I mean, I also remember giving somebody a lesson on Mozart, on how to play Mozart the way Mozart would have played Mozart. By the way, I don't insist on this because I think if Mozart had lived long enough, he would have played legato. So I don't get offended at people playing Mozart all legato. I think that's probably where he would have gone if he had lived a little longer, just like Clementi did. Clementi also started playing very détaché in his youth. I think if these guys, like, if they were reversed, if Mozart had lived a long life and Clementi had died young, would have complete opposite impression of the two of them. But anyway, so she played like this. Uh, just absolutely, you don't have to like it. I kind of think it's charming. Uh, but that's probably the way Mozart would have played it in his day. It's exactly the slurs as they're written. But again, I'm not very pedantic about it. I think he may very well have. Clementi has a sonata, I can't remember which one, where he has old slurring, like very short, and then he takes the very same sonata and he re-edits it with long slurs later. It's really stunning to look at that. It's like, wow, yeah. But of course he lived to do that. Mozart probably would have looked at some of his early music, oh my God, and done the same thing later. So it's perfectly fine. I mean, this sounds very, I mean, why would he be the only exception to not like, I mean, if you prefer that, I'm perfectly fine with it. I mean, the whole idea of performance practices, it's pretty complicated. I mean, there's some early sonatas of Opus 4, which gets recycled as Opus 36, 37, some of these other sonatinas of Clementi. They're actually sonatas, and they're very early. They predate his legato practice, which begs the question, how to play it today? I mean, if you want to be authentic, it's like, well, authentically, I could play it the way he played it at the time of composition, and much more detached. Or I can say, well, but he changed his mind later. Let's play it that way. That's also authentic. I don't know that there's a right way with a lot of these things. I mean, um, same thing with Chopin, but that's a whole other lecture. Good to see you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Arthur. This was a great session. Really appreciate it. Yeah, big round of applause. a great way to kick off our Festival First Friday events this year.
Thank you, everybody.